and we're going to get started with questions. And if you have questions, please put them either in the chat or comments, and we'll try and answer them during the live stream. So first off, Eileen, can you tell us what the benefits are of native plants and whether they're better for the ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. What's really interesting about native plants, it's not that they're better than any other plant. They have just been in an area, in a geographic area, for a long time. And so they've co-evolved with the birds, the bees, the butterflies, and they've been in that place in the same kind of climate. And so there's a lot of good things about having that and not being an exotic plant that just came over from China or Europe. And what we found, if I can show you a slide, I'll pull up the screen and talk a little bit about why native plants are so cool. Let's see if I can do this. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about native plants and why they are so important to our local ecosystem. So here we have our spice bush swallowtail, a really cool little butterfly, but it had, and over on the side there you see its caterpillar. And caterpillars are very particular. They only eat one kind of thing usually. And in this case, it's the spice bush, which is a nice little bush that lives in our forest. And if you don't have that spice bush, you don't have your native butterfly. So you have this thing called the pyramid of life. And on the bottom are the plants. And so if we have native plants, you have the little native caterpillars eating those plants. If you put Japanese plants or European plants or something that hasn't co-evolved with the native plants that were here, they can't interact and they can't do anything together. So here you got this little variegated fritillary caterpillar. What does it need? It needs violets. If you don't have violets, you don't get this beautiful fritillary. So that's kind of the base of the pyramid. And imagine if you take those plants away, it's like you're playing Jenga and pulling out the bottom of the pyramid. So you need these plants, these host plants for your butterflies. You need them for your pollinators. And without these native plants, you kind of really don't have much going on at all. And if anybody has read the book Bringing Nature Home with Doug Tallamy, he talks about this, of how the caterpillars, eat the native plants, the birds eat the caterpillars, and if you don't have that native plant at the bottom, your whole ecosystem comes tumbling down.
Great. So can you recommend some specific native plants? I know you've gone through a few, that attract birds and bees, are good for the ecosystem. Are there some that are deer resistant in addition to providing food for native birds?
Yeah, let me show you a few pictures of, here's our swallowtail on the obedient plant. And like I said, you have to figure out what are the butterfly's host plants. So to get this little guy, you're going to need a tulip poplar. Not just the caterpillars have to eat the tulip poplar, and then you'll get the nectar from with the adult butterfly sucking on the flower. So Joe Pye weed is one of my favorites. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this plant, but the birds like it, the bees like it, the butterflies like it, the deer don't like it in general. It can get a little tall, but it's a great little meadow plant. You want to make sure that you have some plants for the birds as well. This is an arrowwood. And in my yard, the arrowwood viburnum, the deer don't seem to like it. I guess they have enough other things to eat. But one of the things that I wanted to just say, I have a garden for hummingbirds, And the hummingbird plants, here he is, flying in. The hummingbird plants, this is, I call him Cary Grant because he's so good with the ladies, and he's in my backyard all the time. And so to have plants that the deer don't like, that are tough, that your hummingbirds will like, that everything will like, you have to be a little crafty. And this is a Jacob Klein bee balm. And what's cool about this plant is it's in the mint family, so the deer don't usually like to eat it too much. But it has those beautiful red tubular flowers, so you have bees on it, and you also have hummingbirds on it. Another one that I love in my backyard, and again, it has that same red tubular flower so that the hummingbirds would like it, but the bees and the butterflies like it as well, are the buckeyes. And you tend not to see the deer eating this too much at all. It's a small tree, and it's blooming right now, just as the hummingbirds are coming back from their Costa Rican ride. Also, if you like a vine, the trumpet honeysuckle, which isn't the same evil honeysuckle that you'll see in as an invasive, is a wonderful plant to use. Also, self-seeders like the little columbine that can kind of, go around the deer tend not to eat them.
So most of the ones you've shown so far, are they all perennials?
Most of them, yes. There are annual plants that will grow, and the problem about some native plants, they might take a while to kind of come on and be a big tree, and that's why sometimes they might be a little harder to find in the nursery, but you can always look for them online. And one of the things I just wanted to mention to you about Mount Cuba Center, we have a trial garden, and so we are looking to see what are the best plants for the birds and the bees and the butterflies. And the picture that you're seeing on the screen right now is Baptisia, which actually fixes nitrogen in the ground. It's great for the bees, and it makes this thing called ecosystem services. So everything that a plant does for us, we should care about. We should care about that pollination and the nectar and the fixing nitrogen in the ground and all those kinds of cool things. And then these plants, it shouldn't just be a pretty plant. It should be a plant that will be a host plant, and the caterpillars can eat, something that the pollinators can use, and be pretty, or you're not going to plant it.
Great. So are native plants more difficult to grow than, I guess, invasives?
Well, they like to be in a certain place, so you do get kind of a right plant, right place. So when you're looking at your house, you have to say, is this the south side? Is it sunny? Is it wet here? Is it dry here? And you have to try to match the right plant for the right place. And if you do that, native plants are easy peasy. They tend not to like a lot of fertilizer, just a little compost, and they're good to go. But the thing about invasive plants and exotic plants, they come over here, there's nothing that bothers them, there's nothing that eats them, and they can sometimes outcompete our native plants. So native plants in general are pretty easy to grow, but you might have to understand their life cycle of, are they a self-seeder, or are they going to sit there for a while and put down roots and then grow tops? So it's mostly just understanding, and you can go online and find out about a native plant and their life cycle pretty easily.
Is there a book for beginners that or materials? I mean, I heard you just say you could look on the internet, but are there other places to go, like where you could look up plants that like lots of sun versus shade? Or
yeah, I mean, if you go onto our Mount Cuba Center website, which we're going to put a link up at the end, we have a lot of resources of where you can find both more material, but also, what plant, where should I use it, all about our trials, and lots of information there.
Great. So do you have to buy actual plants, or can you also plant seeds?
Yeah, let me just show you a few more slides that I have here.
Okay.
We had Coreopsis, and Coreopsis you can grow from seed. And so we did a whole big seed trial, and we looked and we said, is this good for the bees? And we didn't know if it was really good for the bees or not. So we did a lot of, if you look at all these different colors, the blues, the reds, the yellows, the greens, we looked at all different flowers that we started from seed. And then we said, well, what do these different flowers attract? And some did bumblebees, honeybees, sweat bees. So all kinds of different bees are going to these very different flowers. We found Phlox paniculata Gina was the best plant to attract different kinds of butterflies. We actually tested the nectar, and it was just awesome. White oaks are another tree that if you want to plant one seed, in this case an acorn, and then wait for a while, up comes your white oak. But the thing that's wonderful about white oaks, there's the little seed that you can grow. Doug Talame has said that it supports over 518 native caterpillars. So you're feeding a lot of caterpillars, which means you're feeding a lot of birds, which means you're feeding the whole ecosystem. Some deer-resistant plants, if you can think of things that are kind of sticky, like this aromatic aster, the deer won't want to eat it. If you have something that's a little more minty, the deer don't want to eat it. If it's pointy, the deer don't want to eat it. Ferns, same kind of thing. When it comes to things with seeds, the things like butterfly weed are great to start with seed. You could just plant a few little things and get those a small garden going in your backyard. You could plant this goldenrod over here, the aromatic aster, the gina, and create your own, with 5 little plants, create what could be your little butterfly garden.
So we have a question coming from a participant. Are the small cultivars of Baptista and Joe pieweed beneficial to pollinators?
Yes. If you've selected something and you haven't messed with the flowers and said, oh, we're going to make a double flower, or I'm going to totally change the color of something, if you just made them shorter and the flowers are the same, they'll be just as good. We did a study with Doug Talame on cultivars in general, and a cultivar is a man-made selection. So all a cultivar is you've basically selected it and said, I'm looking, at this plant, and I've selected it for this. And so long as you don't mess with the kind of flower, it will attract them fine. However, in this little picture that you see here, see this echinacea? Mm-hmm. This is in a pot. It's the coneflower. But what they've done with some of the coneflowers is they've bred them so that they have double crazy flowers, so that there's not nectar and there's not pollen and they don't produce seeds. And in that case, it's not good.
So how do you know if you're going to a store or a place to get native plants, whether they've been bred and are no longer as effective?
In general, if it's from, a botanical garden or somebody that you really trust, you probably know that they're thinking of that in mind. If it's burpee seed and there's like, here's our crazy double flower, I wouldn't buy it. So you have to kind of look and see what they've selected for, or do your homework. Go on the Mount Cuba site, and we have we actually have tested all these different cultivars. So we have all the echinaceas, we have all the baptisias, we have all the phlox, and you can see what's the winner. And what we've tried to say is, let's just take this and turn it on its head. So instead of saying cultivars are bad, we're saying here's the cultivar that's best for the birds, the bees, and the butterflies. And we're actually doing studies to find it out.
Great. So we have another question. When you're in the city, is it just a matter of time to get pollinators to come if you've planted all the right plants, or are there other ways to encourage it?
Usually if you plant it, they will come. It may take a little while for something to come. I planted something called the pipevine, and the pipevine swallowtail is the butterfly associated with it, and it usually is farther south, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and 6 years later I got a pipevine swallowtail. So they'll come eventually if you create it. It is a little harder in the city because if you don't have the native bees nesting in the ground, they're not going to come.
Okay.
So it's kind of a whole ecosystem thing that you need the plants, but you also need the right situations for the insects and a place for the birds to be. So
okay.
Yeah, you might have to wait a little longer.
We're getting a request if you could go back to that garden design
Okay.
slide. People are saying that's a very helpful slide.
Yeah, this is just a couple of plants. We do classes that my daughter is not a plant person, and she said, if you wanted me to come, you have to give me instant gratification in an hour. You have to give me 5 plants. You have to tell me what to do and how to plant them. So we do these little classes that are like a pollinator garden, a butterfly garden, and we just said, look, here, we're going to give you these plants. Go home and plant them. And so, any asters or the Joe Pye or the phlox or the goldenrod, they're all good for this. And we're going to put this slide up at the end, right? So that if somebody wants to come back and see it and, write down the genus and species or whatever, you could do that as well. But you just want to think about, especially for butterflies, to have something blooming at all different times. Or if it's a bird, to say, okay, I need some fleshy fruits. I need, grain-like fruits. I need something that's going to get these birds through their migration and, in the spring and in the fall. So you got to think like a butterfly or think like a bird.
So are the plants in this photo or some of the other ones that you've shown, can you put them in a fairly small garden space?
Absolutely. Next slide. So look at this one over here on the right hand side. That's a carnivorous plant in a very small little pot. And what we found is you can just mix plants up together. Here they're very visually alluring, where you've got those heuchera, but the little columbines will kind of self-seed, come back every year. You can take your pot, put it in your garage in the wintertime or up against your house, and these will come. You might have to divide them every couple of years, but they're pretty easy to do. Or you could just decide, like, I want one plant in one pot and I'm going to put it on my patio, and that's it. And they're all pretty easy to do.
Great. So just to let folks know, we are going to have a PDF of the presentation that you'll be able to access after this live stream. So a couple of people are asking about the classes that you mentioned. We're going to put up your website at the end, right? And
yes.
You'll talk a little bit about some of the opportunities, events you have.
Yes, we have all kinds of classes. We have a certificate in ecological gardening, which is pretty cool. So you can learn all the native plants of spring, summer, and fall. We teach you how to compost. We teach you how to plant. So it's a good resource to have.
Great. Yeah, I know you have something on composting. I was looking at that one the other day.
Yeah, well, people always say, well, what kind of, fertilizer should I put down? And I say, don't put fertilizer down. I don't use any fertilizer. I just compost. And people go like, oh, it's so hard to compost. No, it's not. All you have to do is you have to get your greens, which could be your grass clippings or what's left over after you make your dinner and you've got, a bunch of scraps. And you take your browns, which could be your junk mail, your cardboard, um, any kind of old sticks, old brown leaves. You take them half and half, put them together, get them wet, mix them up, put them in your backyard, get a pitchfork, and before you know it, you got compost. And so you're putting down organic matter and it's making, the plant happier. But what you're really doing is you're re-inoculating your soil with bacteria and fungus and all good little critters that make it so that you don't need any fertilizer. Because having fertilizer is kind of like being on crack. You kill all of the critters when you put fertilizer on normally, and then you need it again, and then you need it again. And so you're constantly putting on fertilizer, when if you just do the organic matter, it's all the native plants want. And then once you do it and you get your yard established, you don't have to do fertilizer ever again. And my grass is green, there's no weeds, and I do no fertilizer, I just do compost.
What if you have grass that has weeds in it? Is there a way will the
Yeah.
compost kill them?
Yeah, no, what compost does is it makes the existing grass there healthier. So what you want to keep doing is every time I take the compost when it's lovely and chocolate color, and I just chuck it around my backyard as if I was throwing seeds around. And I let it, I want to do it on a day where it's kind of rainy so that, kind of goes into the soil. And then I throw grass seed on top of it. And the good grass will crowd out the dandelions and the other things that maybe you don't want. So you don't have to use pesticides. You can roll around on it, other than the ticks, but you can roll around on it. And safe as can be. And it's really the way to go. And if you don't have room, you can do a little worm bin and put it in the corner of your kitchen and do the same thing, where you get worms, you put them, rip up newspaper, put the worms in, and then you're throwing your wastes, your organic waste on top of it. The worms chew it up, and then you throw it back in your garden. So
great. Okay, so we've all been to the Mount Cuba website. We have our design plans in place. Wow, look at that. And we know what we want to get. Where can you name a couple of places where you can buy native plants?
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, in our COVID world, can't really go to the plant sales like we used to, but Delaware Nature Society, Brandywine Conservancy, a lot of places have really cool native plant sales this time of year, like in April and May. And so if you can, get out and do that next year, that's a great choice. You also can go online. There's a lot of mail order catalogs, and you do want to be careful because if it's, if you're buying a trillium for 50 cents, it was probably dug out of the wild. So you want to make sure that, it's inexpensive, but not too cheap. Any plant that I have in this deck, you can look it up and, buy it online. There are local nurseries in Hockessin. There's one called Gateway, which is a good one, which has a lot of natives. But sometimes it's even hard to tell what is a native plant. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they will have, a little tag on it that says native. Lowe's actually does carry a line of natives that is on the tag. But I always bring my cell phone when I go shopping, and if I don't know something, I look it up to see what it is before I buy it. but that little bit of extra time and energy to get a native plant is really totally worth it, because you're feeding the whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, these are great photos. I'm really excited to go back and look at your website again. And, I know we've all had to adjust to virtual meetings and events. We'd love to hear some of the things going on at Mount Cuba some of your programs that people can check into.
Okay, if you hold on one second, I'm gonna.
And if I miss something along the way and you want to show us, feel free to do that.
All right, there is one thing. All right, so this is what everybody wants in their backyard. This is a cardinal flower with a hummingbird and a butterfly fighting for it. Doesn't everybody want that? I do. But cardinal flowers are one of those ones that kind of self-seed around. Also, things like black-eyed Susan will seed around. And so if you want to go to the Mount Cuba website, we've got this list so you can take a class. There's the trial garden results that we produce really beautiful publications that will say, this is the best phlox to use. Here's the cultivar of coral bells that has the prettiest leaf. We have Conservation at Home, which talks a little bit about simple tips for your sustainable home. And then there's also Staying Connected. So ways to connect to your community, and some virtual tours and things that we can do while we're stuck at home.
Great. So we want to thank Eileen and Mount Cuba Center for co-sponsoring today's live stream. And we also want to invite you to participate in some of the Sierra Club's events this month. We've got 2 book clubs, book clubs that you can join. One is getting ready to start a book called A Terrible Thing to Waste, Environmental Racism and Its Assault on the American Mind by Harriet Washington. And we have another one about to start called No One is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. We also have, this is a series of live streams. I believe this is the 5th one, and we have one next week, same time and place, called The Future of Offshore Drilling. And we also have a podcast club. So please check out our website, which is sierraclub.org/Delaware. And also check out the website that Eileen just mentioned. Okay, somebody's asking, yeah, and I see we've already got somebody asked about how to get the slides, and we will be posting it on our website.
And actually I got carried away, so I have like my favorite trees, my favorite bush, my favorite herbaceous. So there's a lot of information in that slide deck that will give you kind of things to pick from to when you go to the nursery. Okay, can you see that screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, so when we were talking about seeds before, having grasses and some seeds, and with like a rudbeckia, this is a black-eyed Susan. If you just want to have kind of a meadow and chuck seeds around, this is the best way to do it. You don't have to go out and buy plants. You could just get grass seed, and you can just get your Rudbeckia, black-eyed Susan. And I do this every year. I take the seeds from this plant, and if I want to move it somewhere else, when it forms its little cone, I throw it around. The other one that you can do with seeds like that is your Echinacea, your purple coneflower. And these now come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. I wouldn't do the double forms because, like I said, you're losing the nectar and the pollen. But these are easy peasy. They're not like, they don't live for 20 years, but they'll you know, grow from seed and come up, and you'll be good to go if you're looking for an inexpensive garden. So you want to take the seeds when they've kind of formed their little seed head and throw them around before the winter time.
So you really just wait until that time and then just kind of start brushing the seeds off of the cone?
Yeah, I usually wait till it's like the end of the fall, and I leave half of mine up so that the birds can eat some of them, and then I chuck the other ones around. So a lot of native plants are by, you do editing, and you kind of spread things and then you take away, and it's a little less fussy than traditional horticulture. So besides some of the other trees that I showed you, a tree that does really well around here, and it's beautiful, it's in bloom right around now, is called the redbud tree. And you can get this commercially available very easily. It grows really well in the forest around here because it's a nitrogen fixer. So it's one of those plants, like in the pea family, that it doesn't need the fertilizer. It's taking fertilizer from the air and putting it down in the ground. It's called redbud. I don't know why it's called redbud, because it should be called purple bud. But it's a good little small tree, kind of the size of a dogwood, that would be a good intermediate tree to put in your backyard, and it's commercially available. Magnolias. Magnolias are wonderful. This is called the Sweet Bay Magnolia, and it has a beautiful kind of lemon scent to it, and it'll get about maybe 15 feet tall, but it's kind of billowy and pretty, and you know, something that would go very nice in a small to medium sized backyard. This is one of my favorite trees, and so when I turned 50, one of my nursery friends gave it to me for my birthday, and I planted it, and I came out 2 days later and it was gone. And I yelled at my husband and I said, "Where is it? What happened to that tree? Did you like drive over it with a lawnmower?" And he's like, "I don't know what happened to it." Turns out it was, a common name of this tree is beaver wood. So a beaver came out and ate it. And I saw the beaver the next day gnawing on it. So if you have beavers, not so good. I live on a lake, so I might have beavers. But other than that, beautiful, lovely tree, great for the bees, lovely little white flower on this one. And that's kind of what it looks like. It would normally grow in the pine barrens around here. It's or in a ditch or something like that. It will grow in the wet, the dry, the sun, the shade. That's why I like it. And its older cousin is the southern magnolia, another great plant for bees. The bees are all over this one. This one is evergreen. The farther south you go, the happier it is. So this is kind of like its northern area that you would find it. But it's a very lovely ornamental tree, and you can definitely find southern magnolia out there. Shrubs. Okay, so we did a couple of trees. You know, I talked about the oak tree, how you could plant that in your backyard. Any of the native azaleas are wonderful. The butterflies and the bees will love them. This is our native one that you'll find in the woods of Delaware. It's called the pinkster bloom azalea, and it almost looks like a pink little honeysuckle. And really lovely plant. And this one you would want to put in the shade, as in all the azaleas, they like shade. Another one that's pretty adaptable are the viburnums. They'll take sun, they'll take shade, and they're the ones that get the lovely blue or black berry that the birds can eat later. And you can see this one, the viburnum is called, dentatum is arrowwood. If you can see kind of how this like looks like an arrow. Supposedly the Native Americans did make arrows out of arrowwood. But it's a great kind of shady or sunny small shrub. Here's another one called Henry's Garnet sweetspire, and this one kind of spreads, but it's another very adaptable one. It'll grow in the wet, the shade, the dry. You can't kill it. And this blooms about June. And then it has lovely red foliage on it. Another really adaptable kind of shrub is sweet clethra. Lovely, it's great for the bees, white flowers in probably June to July, yellow fall color, really, really nice shrub. And the ones that I'm showing you, they're not esoteric. You can find them pretty easy. The hydrangeas, there are many kind of hydrangeas. There's the big oak leaf hydrangeas. These are the silver leaf hydrangeas. And so there are Japanese ones and there's native ones. But what we found is that with these particulars, see how there's like little teeny tiny white flowers and then bigger ones? Well, the bigger ones are sterile flowers that don't have any pollen or anything in it. And it's kind of like you eat at Joe's sign saying, come on over here, bee. And so if you just have the sterile ones, you don't have anything to feed the bees. But if you have the sterile and the fertile ones, you can really have a wonderful, lovely plant. And they'll grow in the sun, they'll grow in the shade. Hydrangeas are wonderful. Oh, I'm sorry, I had that one out of order. So that's the fall color on the sweetspire. And that's actually in front of Mount Cuba Center House where I work. Rhododendrons. Rhododendrons are great. You can see the insect in there. The bees, bumblebees totally love the rhododendrons. And this is our native rhododendron maximum, or the rose bay. So some perennials that are great that you can mix up with all these other things. Right now in the garden, there's phlox. And these are lovely kind of a woodland spring phlox that are out. And the bees on these the other day were great. They're very fragrant. They act kind of as a slow spreading ground cover. And these will take some shade. If you like butterflies, this is a great one called the spike gay feather. You might have seen liatris in, you're gotten an arrangement from a florist. They use that, but you can see the little bee there. And both the bees and the butterflies love this plant. Any of the asters, I talked about an aromatic aster. There's also a New England aster. And they're great for attracting, like those late migratory butterflies, as well as the native bees. Our native bees just go in the ground, most of them. They just, they live for a couple of weeks when whatever plant they're associated with comes out, and then they dig a hole, lay a couple of eggs, and they're done. So a lot of, the specificity of a plant and an insect, it's true in caterpillars, it's also true in native bees. Another, if you have dry shade, whitewood aster, man, it's the way to go. This thing will spread, it won't die, the deer won't eat it, it wins. I showed you the Bisostigia, the obedient plant. I put this in here because when life is out of control, like we feel like right now, you need an obedient plant. Because this thing, like the little flowers, it's on a stalk and you can like put them and make them in any order you want. So you can actually move them around. So if you feel out of control, get an obedient plant. But it will spread, make a nice little patch, be great for the bees and the butterflies. And that's my last one.
That's great.
So those are some of my favorites.
Does anybody have any questions? You can just unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like. No?
So come to Mount Cuba when we're open, and we'll show you all these cool things.
And tell us the website again.
www.mountcubacenter.org. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. And if you're interested in some of the Sierra Club programs, ours is sierraclub.org/Delaware, and getting lots of thank yous.
My native plants seem to be a little, this is their first year coming up, and I have, I can never remember the names of them. You've actually pictured a couple of them, but they're a little scrawny.
It takes a year. They're spending their first year probably doing roots,
Okay.
and then the second year they go crazy. I tell a funny story about I wanted to plant pawpaws in my backyard, and so I got a pawpaw tree. I put it in, and it sat there for like 6 years. And my husband was like, "What is wrong with this stick? Would you get rid of this pawpaw? It's pathetic." The 7th year, it took over the backyard. It literally grew 20 foot. But it had spent all this time doing underneath the ground, rooting. And then once it gets established, you don't have to do much of anything other than what I do in my garden is I wait till about March after, you have your dry sticks of, what's kind of left over, because there's little insects living in those hollow sticks. I just break them off, cut them down, make a pile, make my compost, and then that's all you have to do once a year is kind of just whack things back a little bit, and it's easy after that. And as they get bigger, you can kind of divide them, take a shovel, cut them in half, divide them, get more and more of them, or do the seed thing and kind of throw it around, because when you have a native plant, you usually don't have one of them. You will eventually have many.
Yeah. Is there?
I'm actually. Oh, I was going to say I'm actually making my list. I get native plants every year for Mother's Day, including planting them. Not
That's
me.
good.
Do you have any recommendations for like a real early riser, like when tulips would come up? If I wanted to get rid of the tulips and put something else.
Yeah, I mean if you come to Mount Cuba, all the spring ephemerals, there's all kinds of things that come up before the leaves are out. So like bloodroot or hepaticas. We have little thalictrums, like all the little spring ephemerals are out early, and right then. So there's any of those spring ephemerals, and they kind of live this secret life with ants, and they have like this. They form a fruit. The fruit breaks open, and then the ants there's like a little eliosome. It's like a little fatty thing, and the ants take it and they plant it. So there's one called Jeffersonia, which is named after Thomas Jefferson, and mine is getting planted by the ants all over the place. But it comes out, same time that the tulips do.
Great.
I have I'm going to say unique issue in my neighborhood is that I have a few neighbors who seem to think that having a golf course for a lawn and a garden with planted bulbs and nice, neat everything is necessary for the neighborhood. And we're in the middle of trying to establish like a meadow area and a rain garden, and we're putting in native plants, and how it kind of looks a little scraggly until stuff gets established and grows out. And what we end up is neighbors will complain to the county that, oh, we're not taking care of our gardens, and then we'll get a notice that we have to cut everything down.
Well, I think that does happen, but I think what people want to know is that it's intentional. And so because of that, you go out of your way to get a lawnmower and do a little edge around it so that people know, like, this isn't just, we're not ignoring that. And until it gets established, you got to keep it well weeded so that it doesn't kind of, you know, look in between. And I think, and then education. And so if you can invite the naysayers to come help you do a planting, then they'll suddenly maybe be on your side.
Okay, well, we really want to thank you, Eileen. This has been a lot of fun and really informative. And from the comments people are leaving, they're really happy about it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and hope to see you all at Mount Cuba soon. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.